Hi everybody, welcome to the next video, which is the one I'm probably the most excited about, which is the chassis program. I've been talking about it a lot. Many of you would never have seen one. Well, today you're going to get a rough idea. Now, unfortunately, under normal circumstances, I do this sort of thing in the unit so I can show you bikes and stuff like that as I'm talking to you. But I've had an operation on my left eye. I can't drive at the moment, so I'm kind of in a self-imposed lockdown, and I'm having to do everything from home. So I thought I'd add the festive edition of a Christmas tree for you, but I can't show you any motorbikes. Hopefully that will change very soon. So this video is going to talk about the chassis program. I'm going to show you the very basics of how it works, why it's such a great tool to have, and whether you're fitting new geometry parts or you just want to understand where on earth your bike is at, and when you make changes what effects that's going to have on the motorcycle. You want to understand that this is the kind of product that is great. You can't buy it, you can only rent it, and in truth you can rent it, but unless you know the numbers that you're searching for, it's kind of slightly irrelevant. So that's why I'm offering the service that I'm offering. I hope you find it useful, and enjoy. Okay, so let's take a look at the chassis program. What we have here in front of us is, on this side we have all the key dimensions of the bike, which has all been calibrated from the information which I have put in here. Now it's this column here that I send out a setup sheet to my customers. I ask them to fill in what information from that they can give me. So things like, what are the length of the forks, what are the springs you have on, what tyres do you have on, gearing do you have on, type of chain. Pretty basic stuff. There's a few extra questions in there, like what is the preload on the front, what is the preload on the rear in terms of turns, number of turns, and oil gaps in the forks is always useful to know, but I very often most people don't know that answer, so I can work around that information, but I often have to standardize in some way and put in a figure that I believe is fairly standard. Over here on this side you can see this is the rising rate linkage on the back, which we've talked about on a number of occasions. So this is the OEM linkage system on the bike, and you can see where it starts and then it ramps up in terms of its resistance as it goes through its stroke. Down here we have a line drawing of the motorcycle. That's just simply emulating some of the numbers that we can see over here, so nothing major in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making the respective changes. So let's assume for a moment that I get asked to put in or supply an ABM3 link. Now, what you can see is the standard dimensions of the bike here. And I'm just going to put this into static 1G. So what that's effectively saying to me is that the bike is resting on its own weight, and these are then the dimensions that I get. So 23.3 degrees on the rake and 94 millimeters just over on the trail. Here's our wheelbase, swing arm angles, etc, 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 all the way down, giving me various pieces of information. Now what you see has happened is when I put in the link, it's massively changed the geometry of the bike, and that's because I haven't specified specifically the link on the bike. So what I can do is I can alter that down here, but before I do, what you see the program is doing is highlighting areas in green. The lighter the shade of green, the less the change, and so the opposite is applicable. Now it's changed our rake angle from 23.3 to 20.4. It's changed our trail from 94 to 76.6. This is why it's important that you never put a linkage in like this without having it run through some sort of chassis program and checking the dimensions. what I'm going to do now is I'm going to alter the length of the drag link, the adjustable drag link that goes with my linkage, and I'm going to see where that brings me. So what we can see now is an improvement up to 22.7 and up to 90.3, but in my opinion that is still a long way from where we want to be. So I'm going to increase the length of that again until I start to see some changes in dimensions. Now we can see that actually I'm going to have to make the link quite long. We'll move up to 180 and see where that sits before I even remotely start to get back to where I want. And what is key and interesting that's happening here, and this is what takes me so much time in a chassis program, is we're now at a rake angle that's above where we were originally, and our trail figure is slightly above where we are originally. But in an ideal world, I'd like to keep this rake angle figure but extend out this trail figure. So in my opinion, the handling of the 675 is extremely good. Turning is really good, but they sacrifice trail on that, and therefore the bike is not as stable as you want it to be. Therefore that's why you have to have steering dampers and such like on it. And in order to give you confidence, I think it's important that the bike is stable. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. What I also want you to notice here is our linkage, our rising rate. So now you can see the sort of rate curve of a linkage system, and that gives you a clear comparison between the OEM one. So this is starting off harder, so that you have to have lesser weight spring on the bike, and it's keeping its progression down to around 5 or 6%, whereas this one is going up considerably more. So this is where we get our better tyre wear, or part of it. There's also some figures in here that change. Now I would have to go to quite a bit of extensive work here now to try and get these figures up, to get this trail figure up closer to 100 millimeters, and to try and keep this rake angle. And I'll be doing that with spring rates, I'll be doing it with various preload settings, etc., and trying to bring the bike back to roughly where I want it to be. But there is a far simpler solution. I've talked before about yokes on the motorcycles, and most importantly adjustable yokes. So the technology that you're seeing here is pretty much Moto 2 stuff. The linkage is a Moto 2 type linkage, and if we were to put Moto 2 yokes onto it where we could change the offsets, so there's a little spacer that goes in around the steering stem that basically moves the yokes forward or backwards. So obviously you have to put one in top and bottom. But if I look down here at my offset and it says 33.2, if I was to change that and put in a 5mm spacer that effectively brought my offset down to 28mm, now I'm in a really interesting place. Now I've got lots of trail, I've maintained my rake angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this down to 175, and I get 99.3mm of trail, and I get 23.3 degrees of rake. That's a nice place to be, and that's why yokes are so incredibly helpful. If I put an ABM 2 link into the system, and that's our track day linkage, the ABM 3 link tends to be fast track day guys and racers. You can see that, you know, our figures are pretty massive now. Our rake's up to 25.2 and our trail's up to 111. So I'm going to drop that down to 155. And again, I'm sitting in a pretty good place, 99.5 millimeters of trail and 23.3 degrees. The purpose of this software is that when you make a change to the motorbike, it gives you a no argument result. Here are the numbers. The numbers, as is famous saying, the numbers don't lie. So when I make various changes, if I was to put on some different sprockets and I ended up shortening my wheelbase, I want to ask myself the question, what happens to the bike when I do that? So I've taken 14 mil off of my swing arm. You can see it's changed the rake angle, so it's made the bike steer slightly slower. It's pushed up my trail, which is, you know, no bad thing. My wheelbase, as you can see, is significantly different. You can see where I am with seat heights and front height references as well. There's an awful lot of stuff in here that has changed, and one of the other things down here is weight bias. 48.78 on the front and 51.22 on the rear. So every time I make these changes, it changes values on the bike, and I'm not saying that that's an issue. I'm saying that it's important for you to know what those changes are. So essentially, that's how the chassis program works, and I hope that that's given you some insight as to why this is such a very useful tool. Okay, so there you have it, chassis program. I hope you was able to follow some of that, and more importantly, see what drastic changes it makes to the motorcycle when you input certain numbers. I think it's a great tool. I think everybody should be using it, because especially in racing or track days, just you know exactly where your bike is at any given moment. You're not making random changes without really understanding the full effects. So, as I said, I hope that was all useful to you. I enjoyed showing it to you. Until we talk again, enjoy.